Welcome back to our channel. This is Secure Your Wallet. This is the place where we help you make smarter financial decisions, avoid scams, and stay informed about the tricks fraudsters use to steal your hard-earned money. In this video, we'll talk about the infamous scam that shook Nigeria and other parts of the world, promising unrealistic returns and leaving millions of people in financial ruin. Whether you've heard about it before or this is your first time, stick around to learn what really happened, how the scam worked, and most importantly, how to protect yourself from similar schemes today. In 2016, millions of Nigerians believed they had discovered the secret to wealth. All you had to do was provide help, money, any amount you could afford, and in 30 days you'd get 30% more. No banks, no paperwork, no questions asked. They called it MMM, and for a time it felt like magic. Ordinary people were cashing out, posting testimonies, encouraging others to join. The lucky ones cashed out early, pocketing decent profits. Others got stuck, holding on to investments that soon turned to dust, but when it fell apart, it left behind a trail of broken lives. Entire families lost their life savings, school fees vanished, businesses collapsed, suicides were reported. This is the untold story of MMM Nigeria and why people still fall for Ponzi schemes, even today. This is Scams, Scandals, and Schemes. To understand why MMM worked, we need to understand Nigeria in 2016. The country was reeling from an economic recession. Oil prices had crashed, the naira was plummeting, unemployment had soared, especially among youth. Hope was in short supply. Then came MM. MM wasn't born in Nigeria. It started decades earlier in Russia in the 1990s. In the early 1090s, Russia was in chaos. The Soviet Union had just collapsed. What followed was a brutal and disorienting transition. Overnight, the economy shifted from communism to capitalism. Prices of everyday goods skyrocketed. People who had been guaranteed jobs, pensions, and stability under the Soviet system suddenly found themselves unemployed and uncertain of how to survive in the new order. Inflation was out of control. The ruble was unstable. Wages weren't being paid. Factories shut down. Savings became worthless. Amid the confusion and suffering, people were desperate for money, for security, for something to believe in. That was when Sergei Mavrodi stepped in. He had started MMM years earlier as a computer import company, but by 1994 he transformed it into something far more dangerous, a pyramid scheme disguised as a legitimate financial enterprise. He promised massive returns on investment, 30% monthly, sometimes more. There were no products or services. People simply handed over money and were told it would grow fast. The only thing fueling the payouts was a constant flow of new participants. It worked for a while. Millions joined. At its peak, estimates suggest between 5 to 10 million Russians invested their money in MMM. It spread rapidly, fueled by a flood of advertising and word-of-mouth enthusiasm. Television commercials showed average citizens turning into millionaires. People sold their cars, mortgaged their homes, withdrew their life savings, all to invest in MMM. Offices opened across the country. Lines formed outside them. Mavrodi was seen by many not as a fraud, but as a genius, someone who had found a way to beat the broken system. He became a public figure. His face was on television. His company printed its own fake currency, Mavro shares. It didn't matter that they had no real value. People believed, in a country where the state had failed, Mavrodi had stepped in with a promise of wealth and a strange kind of hope. But it couldn't last. The foundation of the scheme, money from new investors paying off old ones, began to crack when the number of new participants slowed. The payouts became erratic. Complaints started piling up. Journalists raised questions. Eventually, the authorities stepped in. In the summer of 1994, MMM's offices were raided. The government opened investigations. People panicked. The company's stock, which was artificially valued, plummeted. In just a few weeks, the entire operation collapsed. Millions lost everything. Facing legal pressure, Mavrodi made a bold move. He ran for the Russian Duma, the lower house of parliament, and won. The seat gave him temporary immunity from prosecution. For a while, he avoided jail, but the damage was already done. Families were ruined. Thousands of people had been scammed. Some were driven to suicide. In the end, when his political immunity was stripped, Mavrodi was arrested. He was eventually convicted of fraud and served a few years in prison. After his release from prison, Sergei Mavrodi slipped quietly back into the shadows, but not into obscurity. The Russian government had banned him from participating in any financial activities, but that didn't stop him. He had already realized that his model, the pyramid scheme disguised as a mutual aid community, could thrive outside Russia, especially in places where people were poor, unemployed, and searching for a way out. Africa became his next target. In 2011, Mavrodi launched Global, a rebranded version of his original scheme. This time, he was more cautious. He presented not as an investment, but as a peer-to-peer donation platform. Participants were told they weren't investing money, they were helping others in the community. In return, they would be helped later with a 30% monthly return. This technicality, he believed, would shield him from legal consequences. It was no longer a business, he claimed, but a social movement. The first major African country where took root was South Africa. At the time, the country was battling widespread youth unemployment, deep economic inequality, and a growing sense of disillusionment among the working class. For many South Africans, especially in the townships and rural areas, formal employment was hard to come by. The promise of earning returns simply by helping others was irresistible. South Africa launched around 2015, and it spread fast, like wildfire through dry grass. The strategy was simple. New members signed up online, pledged money, and within a month they would receive their 30% growth. People were excited. As in Russia, early participants made real money, paid from the contributions of others. Word spread through churches, WhatsApp groups, and community forums. Testimonies poured in. Seemed like a miracle. But the platform wasn't just targeting individuals. It positioned itself as a form of financial revolution, a system outside the control of banks, governments, and big corporations. It played on people's frustration with poverty and inequality, promising a new world where wealth was shared, not hoarded. Mavrodi himself rarely appeared, but his presence loomed. His face was still associated with the movement. His writings were shared online, filled with anti-capitalist rhetoric, attacking governments and financial systems. He told followers not to worry if the media called a scam. "They fear us because we are changing the world," he wrote. By early 2016, thousands of South Africans had joined. Some used their salaries, others borrowed money. A few sold assets. Many believed the system would last forever, but just like in Russia, it was only a matter of time before it collapsed. In April 2016, the South African Reserve Bank issued a public warning about calling it an illegal operation. Financial experts called for caution, but by then it was too late. The number of people requesting to withdraw their profits had outgrown the number of new participants. Payments were delayed and then stopped entirely. The platform crashed, leaving tens of thousands with nothing. After the collapse of South Africa in 2016, Sergei Mavrodi didn't pause. He moved on, his sights set on another country where the ground was ripe for his scheme, Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe in the mid-2010s was a country on edge. The economy was in sharp decline. Hyperinflation had returned. Unemployment was rampant. People needed something to believe in, and promised just that. It offered a chance to escape the crushing grip of poverty, a dream of quick and easy wealth. And like before, it appealed not just to individuals, but to communities, families, and friends. It became a shared fantasy, a collective hope for a better life. But the allure of was not just in the promise of wealth. It was also in what it represented. A rejection of the perceived injustices of the traditional financial system, a middle finger to the banks and the elites. It offered an alternative, a way to participate in an economy that seemed rigged against them. It was a rebellion, a revolution, a movement. And like any movement, it attracted its share of true believers, those who saw in not just a financial opportunity, but a chance to change their lives, their communities, their country. These are the people who became the backbone of Zimbabwe. They were the ones who stood in long queues outside offices, the ones who slept overnight on pavements to secure a spot, the ones who sacrificed their savings, their investments, their hopes and dreams for the promise of a better tomorrow. But that better tomorrow never came. Not in Russia, not in South Africa, and not in Nigeria. Mem might have started as a cry for help, but it ended in misery. For many, was more than a financial decision. It was a leap of faith, a trust in a system that promised to change everything. It was a belief in the impossible. And when the impossible turned out to be just that, it left behind a trail of broken lives. Families were torn apart, savings vanished, dreams were crushed. And yet, despite the pain, the stories, the testimonies, the warnings, people still fall for even today, because sometimes the hope of a better tomorrow is just too strong to resist. Thank you for watching, and if you liked this episode, please leave a thumbs up and subscribe for more episodes of scams, scandals, and schemes. After the collapse of South Africa in 2016, Sergei Mavrodi didn't pause. He moved on, his sights set on another country where the ground was ripe for his scheme, Zimbabwe. At the time, Zimbabwe was still reeling from years of economic devastation. Hyperinflation had destroyed the Zimbabwean dollar in 2008. People were using foreign currencies, mainly the US dollar and South African rand, for everyday transactions. But by 2015 and 2016, there was a severe cash crisis. ATMs ran dry. Banks imposed strict withdrawal limits. People stood in long queues for hours only to be told there was no money. Salaries went unpaid for months. Jobs were scarce. The formal economy had shrunk drastically, and millions survived through informal trading and side hustles. Hope in the banking system was at an all-time low. Into this environment came Zimbabwe, promising exactly what the people had been denied: fast, easy money. As with the other versions of it branded itself not as an investment, but a mutual aid community that connected people who wanted to help each other financially. The language was emotional and persuasive. You weren't just giving money, you were building a new, fairer financial world. The promise was simple: pledge money, any amount, and in 30 days get a 30% return. Early participants made real returns, funded by the influx of new joiners. That's what gave the scheme its momentum. People began pulling money from their savings, even selling personal belongings, just to provide help and secure a payout. Social media platforms buzzed with testimonies, people paying school fees, buying groceries, even starting small businesses, all supposedly thanks to The scheme gained massive traction, especially in the capital, Harare, and in major towns like Bulawayo and Mutare. Just like in South Africa and Russia before it, in Zimbabwe grew with the help of referrals. Users were encouraged to invite others and rewarded for doing so. Entire families and communities joined. Some churches even encouraged their members to sign up. Mavrodi's vision of a global financial revolution seemed to be catching on. But again, the success was an illusion. Beneath the surface, the same weaknesses remained. No real investment, no real value creation, just the constant need for new money to pay old participants. By late 2016, the cracks began to show. The Zimbabwean government and central bank started issuing warnings. Officials called it a Ponzi scheme and urged citizens to stay away. But for many people, the warnings came too late or were simply ignored. They believed the government had failed them before, and they were sure it was just trying to ruin something that was finally working. Eventually, just like everywhere else, the money ran dry. In early 2017, Zimbabwe collapsed. The website stopped processing requests, payouts froze, accounts were frozen under the pretext of system maintenance or restructuring. In truth, there was simply no money left to pay. People were devastated. Some had lost everything. Others were too ashamed to speak out, especially those who had encouraged friends and family to join. Communities fell silent. The Facebook pages that once posted success stories were flooded with angry comments, then went dark. Mavrodi, as always, remained distant, faceless, unreachable, unaccountable. And yet, even after the collapse in Zimbabwe, he wasn't done. By the time set its sights on Kenya, the scheme had already left behind a trail of devastation in South Africa and Zimbabwe. But in Kenya, it found a new kind of fertile ground, one that was digitally savvy, deeply entrepreneurial, and grappling with its own economic strains. Kenya, around 2016, was in the midst of rapid technological transformation. Mobile money platforms like M-Pesa had revolutionized the way people handled money. Transactions that once took days could now be done in seconds. A wave of fintech innovation was sweeping through the country. At the same time, unemployment remained high, especially among the youth. Many educated young people were stuck in a cycle of joblessness, underemployment, or informal hustling. The banking system felt slow, traditional, and out of reach for many. Enter MMM Kenya. With its familiar pitch, provide help and receive 30% returns in a month, MMM tapped into the same emotions it had exploited elsewhere: frustration, hope, and the hunger for financial breakthrough. This time, the scheme spread quickly through Facebook, WhatsApp, and local blogs. It was promoted not just as a way to make money, but as a movement to empower the common person. Promotional materials spoke of a new financial order, free from corruption and capitalism. It painted MMM as a righteous rebellion against broken economic systems. Kenyans took the bait. The process was simple. You registered online, pledged an amount of money, and waited. A few days or weeks later, you were matched with another user to receive help. M-Pesa made it seamless. You'd transfer money directly to another person's phone number. There was no central account, no institution, just a network of strangers exchanging cash in the belief that the system would keep moving. And for a while, it did. Just like in South Africa and Zimbabwe, early adopters made money. The 30% returns, sometimes more with bonuses, were real as long as new people kept joining. Testimonials flooded in. Students paying school fees, parents handling hospital bills, unemployed youths finally having some money to spend. Many thought they'd discovered a financial secret the banks didn't want them to know about. MMM's popularity grew especially in Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu, and even rural areas where mobile money penetration was high. The scheme cleverly recruited guiders, local leaders who acted like brand ambassadors, helping others join and spreading the gospel of financial freedom. These guiders earned commissions from the investments of their referrals, further incentivizing aggressive recruitment. But beneath the surface, the same old fault lines ran deep. There was no product, no business model, no sustainability, just a web of promises built on constant recruitment. And soon, the cracks began to show. By early 2017, the number of withdrawals began to overwhelm new contributions. Some users reported delays in receiving their payouts. The MMM website started posting strange messages about technical issues and system updates. Then came the worst sign. Accounts were frozen. The platform announced a pause on payments, citing a need to restructure the system. In truth, the system had collapsed. Thousands of Kenyans lost their savings. Some had borrowed money to participate. Others had dragged friends and family into the scheme. The sense of betrayal ran deep. Online forums were filled with anger, regret, and confusion. But there was no one to hold accountable. MMM was faceless. Mavrodi himself had not set foot in Kenya. There were no offices, no staff, no address, just a website and a broken promise. The Kenyan government issued warnings too late. Regulators scrambled to distance themselves from the mess. Authorities blamed ignorance and greed, while victims blamed the government for not acting sooner. As the dust settled, MMM quietly disappeared from the Kenyan digital space, but its story had already begun to shift westward. Nigeria in 2016 was a country on edge. The economy had slipped into its worst recession in decades. Global oil prices had crashed, slashing government revenue. The naira lost value almost daily. Inflation soared, businesses closed. Unemployment, especially among young people, hit record highs. There was a growing sense of despair. Traditional systems, from banks to government institutions, felt distant and broken. Many Nigerians felt trapped in a cycle of struggle with no way out. Then came MMM. It arrived quietly, first through whispers on social media, then through WhatsApp broadcasts, Facebook posts, and testimonies that seemed too good to be true. Provide help and get 30% in return within 30 days. No banks, no paperwork, no middlemen, just a community helping one another. It didn't call itself an investment. It was positioned as a mutual aid society, a revolutionary financial system designed by the people, for the people. At the heart of the movement was Sergei Mavrodi, the elusive Russian mathematician who had already run this experiment across several countries, but in Nigeria it took on a life of its own. From Lagos to Abuja, Port Harcourt to Enugu, MMM spread like wildfire. Nigerians embraced it with an intensity that shocked even its promoters. The country had a history of informal savings groups, cooperative societies, and Isusu models, so the idea of pooling money and helping one another wasn't new. But MMM digitized the process and wrapped it in the language of hope and resistance. It wasn't just about money, it was about beating the system. Participation was simple. You signed up on the MMM website, indicated how much money you wanted to provide, and waited to be matched with someone in need. When the time came to get help, you received 30% more than what you'd given. The payouts came in. Real money, real people. Screenshots were shared everywhere. Word spread. The scheme even had guiders, Nigerians who acted as local leaders, trained to recruit others and help them join. The more people you brought in, the more bonuses you earned. MMM became a cultural phenomenon. Churches mentioned it. Taxi drivers discussed it. Market women, undergraduates, civil servants, even jobless graduates, all took part. Some sold their property, others dipped into pensions. People who had never used the internet learned to create emails, register accounts, and log in daily to check their Mavro growth. To many, MMM wasn't just a scheme, it was a miracle. But beneath the euphoria was the same design flaw that had toppled the system in every other country before it. There was no product, no real investment, just a loop of new money paying old members. And by the end of 2016, the cycle began to choke. In December, just before Christmas, MMM Nigeria announced a shocking move. It was freezing all accounts for 1 month. The reason given? The system was experiencing heavy traffic and needed to stabilize. Users panicked. People had sunk their savings into the scheme, hoping to withdraw for the holidays. Now their money was locked. The MMM community managers told users to stay calm, that everything would resume in January. They even claimed it was a measure to protect the system. But the damage was done. Confidence shattered. And in a scheme like MMM, confidence is everything. When January came, a trickle of payouts resumed, but it wasn't the same. Most requests were delayed, others were never honored. Mavros, the virtual currency within the platform, were visible in user accounts but couldn't be withdrawn. People realized they were holding numbers, not money. By March 2017, it was clear MMM Nigeria had collapsed. The fallout was enormous. Thousands of people lost their life savings. Some were left in debt. Others had quit their jobs, sold properties, or borrowed to invest more. The same social media platforms that had once hosted success stories now swelled with anger, regret, and blame. Communities were divided, families torn apart. And Sergei Mavrodi, he was nowhere. He released statements from his website blaming the Nigerian media, the government, and even the participants themselves. He insisted that MMM wasn't a scam, that it was a noble system misunderstood by the world. But no amount of explanation could undo the pain it had caused. In 2018, Mavrodi died of a heart attack in Moscow. He died without ever facing justice for the millions of lives upended by his schemes. In Nigeria, MMM became a cautionary tale. For many, it was their first direct encounter with the brutal logic of a Ponzi scheme. It left behind a legacy of distrust in online financial platforms and reminded the nation, painfully, that in times of desperation, even the wildest promises can seem believable. MMM came offering help, hope, and community. It left behind silence, shame, and loss. By the time the dust settled, the true scale of MMM's global devastation became clear. In Russia, where it all began, it was estimated that between 5 to 10 million people were scammed, with losses totaling over $10 billion USD in the mid-1990s. That financial wound left lasting distrust in the Russian banking system and marked the beginning of Mavrodi's notorious legacy. In South Africa, where MMM re-emerged in 2015, over 200,000 people were believed to have participated. By early 2016, authorities estimated that South Africans had lost about $100 million, over $6 million USD, before the scheme crashed there as well. Zimbabwe was hit even harder. The country was already suffering from economic instability, cash shortages, and mistrust in formal institutions. MMM flourished under these conditions. At its peak, nearly 66,000 people had joined. When it collapsed in late 2016, Zimbabweans reportedly lost close to $50 million USD. The Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe called it the biggest Ponzi scheme in the country's history. In Kenya, MMM launched in earnest in 2016. Though the losses were not as well documented, thousands of Kenyans were swept up in the wave. Regulators sounded alarms, but by the time the scheme slowed, people had already lost millions of shillings. But Nigeria bore perhaps the most catastrophic blow. At its height, over 3 million Nigerians were involved. The Nigerian Deposit Insurance Corporation, NDIC, estimated the losses at over N18 billion, roughly $50 million USD at the time. When MMM froze accounts in December 2016, it didn't just crash, it imploded in full public view. Across all these countries, one pattern held true: desperation met with dazzling promises, hope met with heartbreak. "10 Lessons from MMM, How to Spot and Avoid Ponzi Schemes." If it promises guaranteed high returns with little or no risk, it's likely a scam. Real investments involve risk. A consistent 30% return every month is mathematically unsustainable. No legitimate business can offer exponential profits without a clear source of revenue. Ask, where is the money coming from? If there's no product or service generating income, it's likely using new investors' money to pay old ones. When a system relies solely on recruitment, it's a pyramid in disguise. If the only way to earn more is by referring others, walk away. Transparency is key. If the operators are anonymous or difficult to trace, that's a red flag. MMM's founder, Sergei Mavrodi, never showed up in person. He operated behind websites and vague communiques. When it discourages withdrawal or delays payouts, the system is collapsing. Frozen accounts and excuses for delays are common signs that a Ponzi scheme is running out of cash. Beware of emotional and viral marketing. MMM used testimonies, peer pressure, and community-style language like "provide help" and "get help" to mask its true nature. Desperation is not a financial strategy. Economic hardship can push people toward quick fixes. Scammers thrive in such conditions. Regulatory warnings are not suggestions. They're serious. When central banks or financial commissions warn the public, listen. Don't dismiss them as party spoilers. If it sounds too good to be true, it almost always is. No system creates money out of thin air without a catch. History repeats itself. Educate others. M wasn't new. It was just a recycled fraud with a digital facelift. Learning from past schemes is one of the best defenses against future ones. In the end, MMM didn't collapse because of bad luck or sabotage. It collapsed because it was never designed to survive. It fed on hope, multiplied through ignorance, and ended in regret. But out of its ashes comes a crucial reminder: financial literacy isn't just a skill, it's protection.